The inspiration for this discussion, which happened 4 years ago, was really by Newt Gingrich even before he was a candidate. Newt would often say that he believed that debates and forums, they shouldn't be a back and forth and 60-second, 30-second rebuttal, be a cage match like CNBC would want to do and all that stuff. But you should be able to have an adult conversation, not about what's wrong with the next person, but about your vision and what makes you prepared to be the President of the United States. That's what you're going to see tonight. And if you've been tuning into the debates, I want you to first know this. This is not a debate. This is a forum. There are no timers. This is going to be an adult conversation. This is not a debate. Any forum is only as good as the host and moderator. And you guys know this guy. He's been at a couple of our events. 4 years ago, he led probably the most insightful forum of the 2012 race. This past summer in July, he hosted our leadership summit where he did one-on-one interviews with the candidates. And if you were there, it was outstanding. This guy's a real friend to this ministry. He is a real friend to me and to our team. So when I introduce him, do not look at his tennis shoes, but give him a very warm welcome. Please help me welcome Dr. Frank Luntz as your host and moderator.
Chris.
You're awesome.
This is, even with the weather, this is amazing.
This is awesome. Iowans are tough and four-wheel drives.
And incredibly decent people. You know, I've worked in all 50 states, and so I've had a chance to listen to voters from across the country, everywhere across the country. And I will tell you that there is no state better attuned, more sophisticated, and more qualified to begin the choice of president than right here in Iowa. I got to admit, none of these other moderators who've done this before, they all come up and they've got cues in their ears. I don't have it. They've got messages up front. I don't. This is going to be the most open forum of this entire presidential campaign. And I'm intimidated, but so honored to be up here, because I believe that just maybe you're going to be seeing the next president of the United States. This Thanksgiving table that you see behind us, this represents the table for perhaps 80 million Americans. And Thanksgiving is such an important holiday. It's where friends and family gather, and so often they exchange political ideas as they're having a great meal. And I have to tell you that in my household, I was the only Republican at that dinner. So you have no idea how grateful I am to be standing before you right now. This will be a completely different conversation. But I want to do this with the candidates, not with me. So can we bring up the 7 Republican candidates for president? Please join me here on stage. Please give them your appreciation. Right here.
See you, my man.
I'm going to come right here. Most debates are about candidates arguing with each other. And there's meanness and acrimony, and it doesn't do anyone any good. That is not what this forum is about. I'm proud to say there will be no buzzers, no bells, no gotcha questions, no moderators that you hate. This is going to be a forum, not a debate, where they're going to have the chance, without time limits, to communicate who they are and what they are about. There are going to be less issues here, but it's going to be a discussion of values, of personalities, of what makes them tick. We tried to develop questions that you all would ask if you had the chance, and that is exactly what this forum is going to be. So everyone, I want you to think of this as a Thanksgiving table, and let's have a really great discussion. Let the forum begin.
Mike, you okay? Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, we've heard it. We've heard it. Then we're going to have this conversation.
We want you to talk about immigration right now.
We are going to talk about immigration in about 25 minutes. We will talk about immigration in 25 minutes. You see, what's different about this forum is that everyone is going to get a chance to be heard, and we're going to address all of these issues, but we're going to do so with respect, dignity, and civility. So, Ted, I will address that issue. Here's my deal, is we will address it for 10 minutes up here if you will take the banner and sit down. Otherwise, we will not address it at all. There's a way to do this the right way, and that is the right way.
They're probably not supposed to get
Well, I was going to say that we don't treat each other with civility, but I just saw it right here. So what should be done? Sitting at a table with your colleagues, where one of you may well be president, so that you don't hurt yourselves by being so disagreeable. I remember when these debates, when you could disagree, but it would actually excite people rather than divide them.
Well, Frank, I must say I'm impressed on a question on civility that you arranged to have the protesters interrupted midway. That really illustrated the point beautifully. You're right. There has been a coarsening of our public discourse, and it is sad. It's unfortunate. Some of it is exemplified by the fact that you see many in Washington and many in the media who attack those they disagree with and attack all Republicans as being typically either stupid or evil. And I think that is unfortunate, but let me commend the men and women who are running for president as Republicans. Because I think on our side, we have had a civil discussion based on issues, based on substance, based on a positive vision for this country. And I think it is a stark contrast to the Democratic side of the ledger.
The president is not just the leader of our government. It's a symbol of the nation, the leader of our people. And I think there are consequences when you have a president that has deliberately divided Americans against each other for purposes of political gain. And that's what he's done. He's deliberately pitted Americans against each other for purposes of political gain. This week is an additional illustration to that. This week, in the aftermath of the attacks in Paris, we had a president that spent more time attacking Republicans than he did talking about how we're going to attack ISIS. And these are the sorts of things that I think further coarsen the political discourse in this country. You have a Democratic Party where one of the leading contenders for the presidency, Hillary Clinton, said that Republicans are her enemy.
She called all of you her enemy. Is that the proper way to talk to each other in a presidential campaign, particularly when she was a senator, Secretary of State, and First Lady? Is that appropriate?
Of course not. Of course it's not appropriate. And I think one of the things that has happened in our politics, and maybe in American life in general, is we sometimes attack the messenger if we disagree with the message. That's why I went back on The View, actually, to say to the ladies of The View, who frequently, unfortunately, attack the messenger, that we need to be able to have a civil conversation about our differences. There are real differences between Republicans and Democrats.
Did they treat you well?
I think it was a reasonably civil conversation.
The real problem here is that we've become less mature as a society. You may remember when you were in the third grade, it was really in vogue to attack people and call them names. But as you got more mature, you began to be able to engage in rational discussions and actually explain the reasons for your disagreement with someone. But the less capable you are of explaining your disagreement, the more likely you are to engage in infantile behavior. And all you have to do is go on the internet and read an article, and then go to the comment section. You usually can't get 5 comments down before people are calling each other idiots and all kinds of names. And You know, my tactic when I see people like that is I just look at them with sympathy and I say, that used to be a cute little baby. I wonder what happened to him.
Can you disagree and not be disagreeable? And I think the answer is sometimes. You know, we all believe passionately in what we believe in. I'll bet you there's a few people here who believe passionately in the sanctity of life. And when you see the Planned Parenthood videos, you're outraged. And so it's sometimes hard to hold back. But I think you can be passionate about issues, passionate about ideas, and then still not have malice towards your opponents.
But what is the greatest moral threat? Not economic, not national security. What is the greatest moral threat facing America today? I'm going to work my way down. Just do a few sentences.
Greatest moral threat we have is the loss of God consciousness. The fact that we don't believe that we're ultimately accountable to somebody other than the people that we see.
Marco?
I view the greatest threat as the erosion of values, which is a direct consequence of the erosion of the family, because no one is born with the right values. They have to be taught to you in strong families and reinforced by the faith community and in strong communities around you. And so the direct consequence of the erosion of the family is the erosion of values in our people.
I think the greatest threat we're facing is the assault on our values, coming from Washington, coming from the media, coming from Hollywood. We're seeing an assault on life, an assault on marriage, an assault on the family, and an assault on religious liberty. We're seeing an assault on the Judeo-Christian values and the constitutional liberties that built America into the greatest country in the history of the world.
40% of children in America are born out of wedlock. Today in America, this year in America, is the first time where a majority...
You know, I feel like this is being conducted in Berkeley, California. And I want to emphasize what Mike just said. You watch these Democratic debates, and you do not see conservatives disrupting them. You do not see conservatives being rude. This does not happen at church. This does not happen at town hall meetings. So if anybody else wants to get up and yell, do it now. Seeing that there is...
Just wait.
Yes, but Mark, you have to be careful because Ben's got Secret Service. I'm curious, did the protest that happened earlier, that was disruptive for a few minutes, I mean, it bothers me as a former professor. Did that bother any of you?
It doesn't bother me because I realize that it's a reminder that we live in the greatest country on earth, and we allow people to disagree with us. Those folks aren't going to spend the night in jail. They're not going to be shot out there on the sidewalk. I know there's some people in the audience that wish they would, but they're not going to be.
The president has singled you out for personal criticism, and you challenged him to do it basically to his face, or him to your face. This is your opportunity. You got 1,500 people in this room. If the president were sitting in my chair, what would you tell him?
Yes. So this week, President Obama twice attacked me overseas. At the beginning of the week in Turkey, he said the fact that I said we shouldn't allow his plan to bring to America tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees, he said that was un-American. And then the next day, in Manila, he said it was offensive. Now set aside the irony of the president standing in Turkey on foreign soil calling me un-American. My response was, it's very easy to toss cheap insults when no one can respond. You want to come back, let's have a debate on your refugee policy. And let's talk about the fact, for example, that number one, these refugees are fleeing the disaster that has been caused by the Obama-Clinton foreign policy that has led to the rise of radical Islam throughout the Middle East. Let's talk about the facts that if you look at the refugees streaming into Europe, one study said that 77% of them were young males. That is an odd demographic for a refugee wave. Let's talk about the fact that it appears right now that at least one of the Paris terrorists came among that refugee wave. Let's talk about the fact that the director of the FBI told Congress the administration cannot remotely vet these refugees because they have no information as to which Syrian Muslims are part of ISIS. So as he told Congress, listen, we can query the database over and over again until the cows come home. If we don't have any information, we can't check background. And it is neither offensive nor un-American to embrace the simple common sense proposition that of course we should defend this nation and not invite in people who the administration cannot guarantee are not terrorists here to murder innocent Americans.
I don't think I was ever so embarrassed and angry in my life at a president of the United States as I was this week. When I watched President Obama express visible and visceral outrage, not at ISIS, but at Republicans. I could not believe that the president of France, the left-wing, politically correct, socialist president of France, was closing his country's borders and demanding that we, as French people, go to war against ISIS unmercifully. And our president was saying, let's open our borders and let's go to war against Republicans and specifically Republican governors. Would I like to see John Kerry resign? Of course I would. But let's not forget, John Kerry is only doing the bidding of the person who appointed him. I've got a better idea. Instead of getting rid of John Kerry, I'd like for Barack Obama to resign if he's not going to protect America and instead protect the image of Islam.
This is one of the decisions that they're going to use in who they believe is best able to be president. It's September 11, 2017. And you're in the Oval Office, and it's 9 p.m., and you hear that there's been a simultaneous attack on Times Square, on the Theater District, and on Yankee Stadium. You pick up the phone, and this is what you hear. What is the very first thing that you do?
You need to understand who's responsible for it, and there needs to be a consequence for what happened. And you need to go directly after the source of that attack in whatever safe haven they use to coordinate it. It leads to a broader point. This is a complex question, and you asked for a brief answer. There is no brief answer, because this is a very complicated thing. In addition to everything I've just outlined, we have to understand that the capability to conduct that sort of attack only exists when these radical terrorist groups have a safe haven from which to operate. So, for example, 9/11 occurred because al-Qaeda had a safe haven in Afghanistan, provided to them by the Taliban. Paris occurred, and the ISIS attacks are occurring because ISIS has a safe haven in Syria, in Iraq, and increasingly in Libya, from where they are training fighters and coordinating these attacks abroad. We should not allow these safe havens to exist. They should be targeted now so that the day you described never happens.
What do we do now? What do we do now? Because we don't want to be facing another 9/11 on 2017. And so what we must do is deny ISIS territory. We must deny ISIS territory. And that it means we must cut off their supply lines. We must cut off their money. It means we must support our allies in the fighting of this fight. And so many of our allies have asked for very specific things, which we have not provided. We are not leading in the world. And when the United States of America does not lead, the world is a tragic place.
The third is you must bring your people along with you. You must have the support of the United States and of the people of the United States. And that's why it's so critical that the president uses the pulpit of the presidency to explain to the American people the consequences, what's at stake, what are our choices, and why he's chosen this course of action. And last but not least, it has to be as the last resort. In essence, we have tried everything else. In the case of ISIS, there is nothing else to try. This is a radical jihadist group.
So
they do not have a diplomatic corps.
Why does the president not do this?
Well, he's a bad president. I mean, the deeper issue at play is twofold. Number one, the president refuses to acknowledge for what this is. This is a civilizational struggle between those of us that believe in freedom and liberty and radical jihadists that do not. They don't hate us because they're unemployed. They don't hate us because they're disgruntled. They hate us because in America, women drive cars. They hate us because my daughters go to school, because little girls in America go to schools. They hate us, and either they win or we win. There is no middle ground with them. And so these are the things that need to be put in place. And the second problem this president has, he ran on the promise of disentangling us from all of these conflicts in the Middle East. Well, guess what? We're entangled. We can ignore these radical jihadists, but they will not ignore us. We either defeat them now, or they will grow harder to defeat, they will grow larger, they will grow more powerful, and they will pose a threat even larger than the one they pose today.
Listen, the use of military force is the most serious decision any commander-in-chief makes. And I believe military force is justified only to protect the vital national security interest of the United States of America. I think the most consistent failing of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy is that it ignores the vital national security interest of the United States. You know, you asked a minute ago, Frank, is President Obama an armchair quarterback? It's worse than that. The policies he's advancing are helping the other team.
And Marco, I'll start with you because you have young kids. We've been talking about this education crisis since 1965. It's been 50 years, and it seems like every level of government has failed to give our kids the skills, the talents, and the education they need to be as successful as they can be. All you have to do is look in the inner city, look at Appalachia, look at poor areas of the country. Doesn't matter what state you're in all 50 states there are schools that are failing. What is the role of the president in education, and what specifically would you promote? Because our kids are not getting the quality of teaching they deserve.
Well, I agree that our K-12 system in America is deficient and that it's not preparing kids to compete in the 21st century, but it really isn't the role of the federal government to run the K-12 system. That belongs to state and local communities. That's why we don't need Common Core, and quite frankly, that's why we don't need a Department of Education. I do think, as the biggest payer of higher education, we have a vested interest in what higher education is promoting, and that we need to re-examine and quite frankly, modernize what higher education means in the 21st century. For starters, it must mean more career and vocational training. Some of the best paying jobs of the 21st century require more than traditional high school, but less than 4 years of college. And at some point in our history, we started telling kids that trade school were for the kids that weren't smart enough to go to college. Well, that isn't true. Trade school are for the kids that at 18 years of age want to make $50,000 as a welder, as an airplane mechanic, as a car technician. And we should be training people to do that. We should be opening up federal financial aid, not that they have to wait till they're 18 to use the Pell Grant. They should be allowed to use it at 16 and 17 to go to high school in the morning and trade school in the afternoon. So when they graduate, they don't just get a high school diploma. They are industry certified and ready to work, because there are good paying jobs in these careers and we're not training people to do it.
Marco, I met your dad once when you became Speaker of the Florida Legislature. And I've heard you tell the story of your father's sacrifice and your mom for you to get to where you were. But I wonder if you could describe how it felt as you were standing up on that podium to take control of the Florida Legislature, one of the youngest, if not the youngest speaker ever. And there was your father, and knowing what he'd been through for you. As you looked down on him, what were you thinking?
You know, my father had a particularly difficult life. Neither one of my parents came from wealth or privilege. They were both born on the island of Cuba, and they both were born to poor families. My father was primarily a banquet bartender, and that's what he did for a living. And he worked well into his 70s. He worked on nights, he worked on weekends, he worked on holidays, he worked on days I'm sure he didn't feel like working. He worked so that we would have the chance to do all the things he never could. And I guess at that moment, as many times since, I've been reminded that he stood behind that small portable bar in the back of a banquet hall for all those years. So one day I could have a chance to be anything that I wanted.
So how did you thank him?
I felt that the journey from behind that small portable bar to that podium was the essence of what makes America special. That journey between that bar and the life that I have today is the essence of the American dream. It's what makes us special. And I'm going to tell you why it makes us special. Because that's not just my story. That's our story. In this country, we are all but a generation or two removed from someone who did that for us. Every country in the world has rich people. Even the poorest country in the world has rich people. What makes America so unique is that in this nation, millions and millions of people who are not rich nevertheless achieve happiness through hard work and perseverance. And whether or not we remain a special country will be largely determined by whether that's still possible. So how I felt that day? I felt obviously grateful to my parents and to the blessings God has provided us. But I felt like in some small way, my father looked down and said, those years of sacrifice were worth something. They mattered. I was consequential. I mattered because I opened doors for my children that had been closed for me. That only would have been possible in the greatest nation on earth.
It was 4 years ago when you told the story, very emotionally, about the struggles with your daughter. And you talked about how prayer answered those struggles. This is a difficult question to ask, but is there a time when you cursed God? Cursed God, when you felt that God did not answer you, even with a prayer, even with the conviction, even with the belief?
I often give a testimony talking about how I came to the United States Senate and found the Lord. I know most of you don't think he's there, but he is. And it's really true. I really became alive in my faith and my relationship with Jesus Christ when I came to the United States Senate. And I'll never forget the last day of the vote, Dianne Feinstein got up and talked about how we had to keep this procedure legal, because late in pregnancy, sometimes women would find out that their child would have no eyes or no ears, or be blind or lame, or have a cleft palate. I mean, she listed all these things. And I got up and said, my wife is pregnant, 20 weeks old, and we have a sonogram in another few days. And I don't know whether our child is perfect or not, but they're no less of a child if they have some sort of disability. Well, a few days later, we lost that vote. I poured everything into it. I never felt better that I was doing what I was being called to do. And we went to that sonogram, and I'll never forget the sonographer going over Karen's abdomen and looking up to us and saying, "Your child has a fatal defect and is going to die." Our little kids were there at the time. They didn't know what was going on, but they knew their mommy and daddy were crying. We rushed out of that room and got into the car, and I tried to go home, but I couldn't. All I could do was cry and speak bitterly to a God who I thought was calling me. And this was his answer. He was going to take my son. So no, I was not happy with God. This newfound friendship was not as easy a course as I thought. People wrote us and told us that what we went through, our pain, gave them the courage to save the lives of their children. And so what I learned was that if you are faithful, God will be faithful.
For about 24 hours, I wasn't sure if I was going to come here. I was supposed to be the moderator, and I have a connection to Iowa. My career was supposed to have begun in 1996, and 3 days before the Iowa caucuses, my father had a heart attack and died just in the middle of the night, just went down. And I thought that it would go away, and it doesn't. But I was taught something there, which is, as horrible as it is to lose a parent, it is nothing like losing a child. I know faith matters to you. Is there anything that you can teach me about how faith helped you cope with your loss?
Well, first let me say that I am moved by every story that I've heard this evening, and honored to be at this table. I was very blessed. I think it was part of God's plan, actually, that I would renew a personal relationship with Jesus Christ before I needed it most. I had a long battle with cancer. It was a very tough battle. There were months when literally the only thing I could eat was the grilled cheese sandwiches my husband Frank, who's here, of more than 30 years, made for me. But while I was going through that battle, our younger daughter Lori was going through a much worse battle. a battle against the demons of addiction, a battle she had waged for a very long time. And literally, as I finished my cancer treatments, she died. There is no possibility that I could have endured that loss unless Jesus had been with me all the way. I remember choosing the flowers, and I chose the flowers that were her favorite for her wedding. And I remember then choosing her mass card. And the last two lines on that mass card, which I know God put in front of me when I needed them, the last two lines are on that mass card were, "Do not grieve for me, because God has set me free." You know, all of the people on this stage, all of the people in this church are people who care deeply about our nation, who love our nation, and are people of faith who love our God as well. And we started this conversation by talking about what's at stake for our nation. What's the greatest moral challenge of our nation? And I do think it's worth saying that people of faith make better leaders, because faith gives us humility. Faith teaches us that no one of us is greater than any other one of us, that each of us are gifted by God. Faith gives us empathy. We know that all of us can fall, and every one of us can be redeemed. And faith gives us optimism. It gives us the belief that there is something better, that there is someone bigger than all of us. And so I think it's important that we elect a leader of faith, and that we elect a leader as well who knows that more prayer, not less, is necessary in public life and in all our lives.
We have reached the end of this discussion, and I do believe that you had the opportunity to tackle issues that were not raised in the 4 debates, and the chance to do it in a way. In fact, I got to compliment you in the civility and decency that you all treated each other. And I do think someone needs to explain this to CNBC. You can get good answers out of people without being rude and horrible to them.
Let's thank Frank Luntz for a wonderful job moderating.